Well, good evening, everybody. I'm hoping that this audio is a little bit better. I'm using a different set of headphones. Very cold day in Idaho today. It's commonly cold here. You might not know that from watching the propaganda for the past few decades about how the earth is swallowing us all up. I mentioned yesterday a book called Between Two Ages by Brzezinski, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. Technotronics is defined more or less as the impact of technology and electronics on human affairs and relations. You may have heard of technocrats, which are quite different than politicians. In the past few years, we've seen technocrats completely influence and dictate the social narrative or the dialogue that's going on between people. He has a quote by Hermann Hesse in the beginning here from Steppenwolf. Human life is reduced to real suffering, to hell, only when two ages, two cultures and religions overlap. There are times when a whole generation is caught in this way between two ages, two modes of life, with the consequence that it loses all power to understand itself and has no standard, no security, no simple acquiescence. I read that and I sort of think of Rome. And in Rome, we had a decision to eventually restart the calendar to a year zero, because there was such a drastically different age than the age that came before it. And through the long history of humans, we can give ourselves different ages. In the last 2,000 years or so, maybe we had an age of religion, of Christianity and Catholicism, that has started to wane and come to an end. At least it's unrecognizable even from a few decades ago. I just pulled this book from the shelf and wanted to read a little bit from it, because we take for granted the cell phones and the computers that our great-grandparents would have never logged on to Facebook. You know, what's the point? That's what they would have asked. And Brzezinski is sort of addressing this here. I think this book was made up in the 80s. This chapter is the onset of the Technotronic age. I think it's very telling of today. It says, instead of accepting himself as a spontaneous given, like maybe a man of religion or woman of religion would have, a creature of God, a spontaneous given. Instead of accepting himself as a spontaneous given, man in the most advanced societies may become more concerned with conscious self-analysis according to external explicit criteria. What is my IQ? What are my aptitudes, personality traits, capabilities, attractions, and negative features? So just to riff off of that, you'll see in social media profiles, people will put their personality traits up on there. Now, they'll never associate that personality traits dictate political bias. You'll never get there with them. They're too much of an individual. I don't want to say that, because an individual is really someone that thinks for themselves. We'll say they're too much egocentric or egocentric. They're too much in their own vision of themselves, their own vanity. Jonathan Haidt put out the book The Coddling of the American Mind, in which he writes, since the introduction of Instagram onto the social sphere, suicide rates and pre-teen females went up sixfold. So they're always conscious of self-analysis according to external explicit criteria. The internal man, spontaneously accepting his own spontaneity, will more and more be challenged by the external man, consciously seeking his self-conscious image. And the transition from one to the other may not be easy. You see the transition of man as a whole, the psychology. It will also give rise to difficult problems in determining the legitimate scope of social control. You see what it's all about, yes? Like we talked about Plato yesterday. The possibility of extensive chemical mind control, the danger of loss of individuality inherent to extensive transplantation, the feasibility of manipulating the genetic structure will call for the social definition of common criteria of use and restraint. Well, we have all that now, right? We have all that in our ethicists, with our bioethicists, with our experts. They've got them all, fleets and fleets of these people, directors of alphabet agencies that will tell you what is right and what is wrong. How will you deal with your external self? Well, they'll tell you all about it. You know, the feasibility of manipulating the genetic structure. Do we have a novel injection that works on the RNA? Is that something we've come across recently? Would we call that feasible? As a previously cited writer put it, I don't know who he cites, I'd have to go back a couple pages, but while the chemical affects the individual, the person is significant to himself and to society in his social context, at work, at home, at play. The consequences are social consequences, right? So what you do has a social consequence. Have you heard that message recently? In deciding how to deal with such alterers of the ego and of experience, in parentheses here, and consequently alterers of the personality after the experience. I guess they interpret it for you. And in deciding how to deal with the changed human beings, changed is in quotes here, we will have to face new questions such as, who am I? When am I who? Have you heard about fluidity? Who are they in relation to me? So there you have your others and your antis. Moreover, man will increasingly be living in man-made and rapidly man-altered environments. By the end of this century, approximately 2/3 of people in the advanced countries will live in cities. Urban growth has so far been primarily the byproduct of accidental economic convenience. Well, if you believe that, you can believe anything. Of the magnetic attraction of population centers, and of the flight of many from rural poverty and exploitation. You know, as if they were given a choice. A lot of revolutions, a lot of changes, they don't need the guillotine. Simple economic pressures can really sway you. And you go where the opportunities are. But who's to say that those opportunities needed to change? That's what he doesn't tell you here. He calls it accidental economic convenience. Well, accidental, yes, accidental for the rural populations. None of them wanted it. They introduced the automobile. Nobody wanted the automobile. Nobody wanted it. The horses worked just fine. That whole economy built around horses and transportation, delivering the mail, growing the feed, raising the horses, trading, selling. All that got upset. I think that's why he puts accidental in quotations coming up. It has not been deliberately designed to improve the quality of life. Well, that's for sure. The impact of accidental, in scare quotes, cities is already contributing to the depersonalization of individual life as the kinship structure contracts and enduring relations of friendship become more difficult to maintain. We had a very prominent group in charge of very prominent riots. I have a printout of it before they pulled it from their website. But they stated that they support the tenet that came from the Communist Manifesto by Marx, that you had to eradicate the family. It was an impediment to the future. It's archaic. It's no longer necessary. We're all going to link arm in arm. A big global village. Julian Huxley. Now there's an interesting name, right? He was the brother of Aldous Huxley. See, you hear these names on social media and you go, oh yeah, Orwell, oh yeah, Huxley. And you think they are little islands. But here you go. Here's another name you've never heard of, Zebra Brzezinski, who's a big, big deal. Quoting him as if he knew him, as if he knew the guy. Right? Huxley family was very important, mind you. Julian Huxley was perhaps guilty of only slight exaggeration when he warned that, in quotes, overcrowding an animal's leads to distorted, neurotic, and downright pathological behavior. We can be sure that the same is true in principle of people. City life today is definitely leading to mass mental disease, to growing vandalism, and possible eruptions of mass violence. Have you been paying attention for the past 2 years? Have you been there? Whether you believe in the January stuff, or maybe you've looked at Portland or Seattle or Chicago, or maybe if you've really been paying attention and not been so egocentric and so worried about how the external person defines your internal person, maybe you've really been paying attention and you've seen the riots all across the world. What just happened in Asia recently, in Kazakhstan? How many people were detained? Thousands. What's going on in Europe? What's going on in Brazil? Are you paying attention to that? Or are you just worried? Are you just worried about what Brzezinski says, at work, at home, and at play? or you're degenerating family kinship, and you're degenerating friendships that get less and less every year. The vandalism in U.S. cities like New York and Chicago are unreal. No American would have accepted it 20 years ago. Guaranteed. Absolutely. The problem of identity is likely to be complicated by a generation gap, intensified by the dissolution of traditional ties and values derived from extended family and enduring community relationships. What he's telling you right there is equivalent to Mao's Red Guard, where they took their parents out into the streets and humiliated them. They humiliated their teachers. Public show. And you see the exact same tactics going on, by authors with last names like D'Angelo. I won't even mention all their names. You know who they are if you've been paying attention in the littlest bit. That's what he's telling you right now. I mean, extended family and enduring community relationships. You're no longer getting your values are passed on from father to son, from mother to daughter, parents to children. That's no longer the case. Where are you deriving them? They're being given to you by media, by internet, etc., etc. Really easy to see. I brought up the term yesterday, mass formation psychosis. Think about it. Think about it. Are you one way or another way? Where's the nuance? Are you marching in formation? Do you not know what to think? So are you looking to your left and right to make sure you fall into step? The dialogue between the generations is becoming a dialogue of the deaf. Isn't the communist said not to trust anybody over 30? It no longer operates within the conservative liberal or nationalist internationalist framework. The breakdown in communication being between the generations, so vividly evident during the student revolts of 1968, right, was rooted in the irrelevance of the old symbols to many younger people. Well, who's to say they're irrelevant, right? Has anyone ever, have you thought about why do fashions change? Just for something new? Why does music change? If some generation likes some fashion or music, why wouldn't it be passed down to the next? And theoretically, indefinitely. Why not find the flaw in there? Because it used to. Generate thousands of years. Medieval Europe was relatively stable in their fashions and songs. I mean, you only read the histories of the, madams and lords and whatever, their fancy frou-frou, but for the common people, it's pretty common to have the same ditty passed down generation to generation to generation. Why would the music change so much? Why would the stories change so much? You tell the story of Hercules for hundreds of years, thousands of years. To an extent, we're still telling it, but it's quite abridged, quite a Cliff Note version, and the music changes weekly. There's a new genre coming out, and most of it's generated by robots now. I mean, that's where they got you. The appreciation of a trained musical artist isn't really there, is it? It's an appreciation of imagery. And they'll never know that the mansion and the cars and the jewelry is all contractual with the record company. And when the contract is over, that stuff goes back. You believe it. Interesting documentary about the boy bands, Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, and what their producer did to them. Oh, that's the reality of it. You heard Steve Tyler of Aerosmith talking about it. I mean, the reality of what happens if these people are used, just like you. Just like the military, they get them while they're young. They give them promises. I'm just going to finish with this last sentence here. Debate implies the acceptance of a common frame of reference and language. Since these were lacking, debate became increasingly impossible. And it's continued to increase. And that's what this book's about. And it's going to continue to increase. They don't want to stop it. Just jumping back a couple pages here, just because I have to. I can't stop. The onset of the technotronic age, he's listing new social patterns. Number 7, in the industrial society as the hitherto passive masses, that's how they looked at medieval Europe, for example, became active, there are intense political conflicts over such matters as disenfranchisement and the right to vote. The issue of political participation is a crucial one. In the technotronic age, the question is increasingly one of ensuring real participation in decisions that seem too complex and too far removed from the average citizen. Political alienation becomes a problem. None of this ringing a bell? Any of this hitting home? Similarly, the issue of political equality of the sexes gives way to a struggle for the sexual equality of women. In the industrial society, women, the operator of machines, he put that in there in hyphens. In the industrial society, women, the operator of machines, ceases to be physically inferior to the male. A consideration of some importance in rural life, and begins to demand her political rights. In the emerging technotronic society, automation threatens both males and females. Intellectual talent is computable. The pill encourages sexual equality, and women begin to claim complete equality. Well, that's what they're telling you with the breakdown of the family. It's no longer necessary. You can scientifically raise children now. They can get ovum, they can get sperm, they can combine them in whatever ways. As Aldous Huxley wrote in Brave New World, right? And for the different classes, what they do? They'd shock them with alcohol. If they wanted just an operator of machines, they would shock them with alcohol because they didn't need to know more. And to them, this is humane. It's humane because why would they want to worry about all that other stuff? He's already talked about the increase in neuroticism. Well, how do you counter for that? The newly enfranchised masses are organized in the industrial society by trade unions and political parties and unified by relatively simple and somewhat ideological programs. Really simple. Are you for or are you against? Are you pro or are you anti? That's as simple as they got it for you. And then you fall in and start lockstepping all the way home. Moreover, political attitudes are influenced by appeals to nationalist sentiments for the greater good. That's what that means, for the good of all. Communicated through massive increase of newspapers employing naturally the reader's national language. In the technotronic society, the trend seems to be toward aggregating the individual support of millions of unorganized citizens who are easily within the reach of magnetic and attractive personalities and effectively exploiting the latest communication techniques to manipulate emotions and to control reason. I'll read that again for those that are hard of hearing. In the technotronic society, the trend seems to be toward aggregating the individual support of millions of unorganized citizens who are easily within the reach of magnetic and attractive personalities, and effectively exploiting the latest communication techniques to manipulate emotions and control reason. Reliance on television, and hence the tendency to replace language with imagery, which is international, that means global, rather than national, and to include war coverage or scenes of hunger in places as distant as, for example, India, creates somewhat more cosmopolitan, that's global citizen, though highly impressionistic, they're manipulating you, involvement in global affairs. Well, that's where he says the trend seems to be, 30, 40 some odd years ago. That's Seabrig Brzezinski. Many such books like this. You can read them again and again. So there's really nothing new that comes down the pike. I mean, there's no surprise. And we've gone from disaster movie to disaster movie, and my whole life the world's been just ready to end, Independence Day with Will Smith, climate catastrophes, global cooling, acid rain, global warming, stock market crashes, bubbles exploding. And now we've got the big one, right? We all need to come together for this, because if we don't, oof. I mean, what if we don't? What if all the countries aren't in this together? What if all the countries aren't about saving the world together and this massive wealth transfer? I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine the mansions never bought, and the limos never driven, and the private jets never flown? What an atrocity! What an atrocity it would be if we didn't come together for this. And they've got just like he said, masses and masses of confused people who have been pushed into cities, who have been alienated from their friends and their families, who are in constant comparison of their internal self to their external self, who are told that their value is worth less than their LinkedIn profile, in an overly complex post-industrial society where information is rampant. And because people are trained not to trust themselves and to trust experts from day one, they can't see what's going on right in front of their face. So they find a champion. Just like in the Middle Ages, choose your champion. People would choose their champion. Their knight, they wanted to fight for them. Middle Ages, heck, go all the way back to the Greeks. Who's your champion? I mentioned Troy the other day too. That's how it starts out, right? Because the two armies could fight and decimate each other, and a lot of people would lose a lot in that scenario. Not today, but back then. So what did they do? In the beginning of the movie, if you recall, both armies choose a champion. Then they give you the propaganda with Brad Pitt. He's laying, he's not doing push-ups. He's laying around with women, and he's not doing testosterone therapy. He's just, sleeping in. You're like, if you can believe that, you can believe anything. But the two armies, they choose the champions, and the champions duke it out for the sake of the cities, for the sake of the armies. You have it here in this a different form, but the same guys thousands of years later. Now people's champions are on news channels, and you sit inside your echo chamber and you can't even watch something. It's amazing. Turn it off. That's what you hear. Turn it off. I can't watch that crap. That crud. Why not? Why does it hurt you so bad? At the very least, you would think it would be wise and smart and just common sense to watch both sides. That's what Julius Huxley wrote about in his book, The Next Million Years. No, it wasn't him. It was Charles Galton Darwin. But along the same lines, the rulers of the world, the technocrats, the scientific thinkers, they'd have to remain wild, but it wasn't going to be possible for everyone else. Too difficult, they claim, for you. That's too difficult for you to sort out all this information. What is your IQ? How do you compare to the external? Well, those are all good questions that you'll have to decide for yourself. And I hope you sleep very well tonight and get up, and you gotta go to work tomorrow, huh? I spent about 4 hours today under a house trying to fish wire through 30 feet of insulation in the dark, in the cold. But that's what you got to do, isn't it? To keep the roof over your head and to take care of those you love. So definitely do that. Definitely do that. Take care of those you love, and don't let the friendships break up over this nonsense. Don't let the families break up over this nonsense. The champion of the opioid crisis just came out and said, it's transmissible. No matter if you've had 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, you can transmit it. But what'd they tell you 2 years ago? Why do you got to get it? To protect grandma, to protect Nan, to protect your neighbor. That's why you're doing this. It's not for your own good. That's what they train you. Nothing's for you. Don't do anything for your own good. We will take care of your own good. You just do this for other people because we tell you to. Oh, people will never figure it out, but we truly are between 2 ages right now. The leavening of an old age and the rise of a new age. And people are lost and confused and scared. So hang on to those around you, and the ones you love. Make a phone call, someone you haven't talked to in a while. Truly, 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 that's the best thing that you can do. Control what you can control. You can't control. They're trying to convince you this butterfly effect that if you don't do what they tell you to boost stock prices for company X, that you're going to be affecting so and so out in the middle of central continental third world country. It's not true, is it? Not when you look at the numbers. It's really the first world countries that are getting plummeted. And you can't do anything about that except improve upon yourself and take care of those around you. So, sweet dreams. We'll see you soon.